we're of the firm belief that I think you can actually design for sustainability, and you could do this in a way in which you can deliver customers, like I said, an amazing experience at nearly the same cost, but with far less carbon.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. Welcome to AI and the Future of Work, episode 318. I'm your host, Dan Turchin, CEO of PeopleRain, the AI platform for IT and HR employee service. Our community is growing. We recently started publishing a weekly newsletter so that you can learn more from guests, and we share some fun stuff that gets left on the cutting room floor. We will share a link to sign up for that newsletter in the show notes. Join us there. If you like what we do, please tell a friend and give us a like and a rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. If you leave a comment, I may share it in an upcoming episode, like this one from Tina in Sebastopol, California, just up the road from me, who's a tax advisor and listens while sipping her evening Pinot. That's a wonderful activity. Tina's favorite episode is that one with Naomi Ionita and Derek Shao from Menlo Ventures, who shared fascinating results from their research on enterprise AI. Glad you enjoyed that one, Tina. We learn from AI thought leaders weekly on this show. The added bonus, you get one AI fun fact each week. Today's fun fact: Garrett DeVink writes in the Washington Post that the AI boom may unleash a global surge in electronic waste. Companies are spending heavily to build and upgrade data centers to power generative AI projects and to stock them with powerful computer chips. If the AI boom continues, the older chips and equipment could amount to extra electronic waste equipment, equivalent to throwing out 13 billion iPhones annually. By 2030, researchers at the Chinese Academy of Sciences and Reichman University in Israel predicted the AI boom will increase the total amount of electronic trash generated globally by between 3 and 12% by 2030. Developing and deploying the algorithms behind generative AI tools like OpenAI's ChatGPT is significantly more resource intensive than for previous generations of software, requiring more advanced and power-hungry chips. In July, Google said its carbon emission footprint had increased by 48% since 2019. Microsoft said in May its emissions are up 29% since 2020, threatening the company's goal to make its operations carbon negative by 2030. My commentary: this is yet another reminder about how much more efficient human brains are than digital brains. The environmental impact of AI, both hardware and software, will soon be calculated when assigning AI responsibility scores. Expect to hear much more about AI regulation and specifically AI grading and the environmental impact of AI in the year ahead. Of course, we will link to that full article in today's show notes. Now, shifting to this week's amazing conversation, as Logitech's Chief Operating Officer, Prakash Arunkundrum owns the operational and organizational effectiveness of the $14 billion market cap company that employs more than 7,300 people globally. Prakash's areas of responsibility span Logitech's operations, including global manufacturing, worldwide supply chain, sourcing, customer experience, and quality operations. Additionally, Prakash serves as the GM of the business unit at Logitech. He's also responsible for driving the strategy and execution of Logitech's environmental sustainability initiatives. We'll have to get his feedback on today's fun fact. And he oversees corporate strategy and M&A. Prakash joined Logitech in 2015 and previously held executive positions at management consulting firms A.T. Kearney and PricewaterhouseCoopers. He holds a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from Central Electrochemical Research Institute in India and a master's in materials engineering from the University of Maryland at College Park. He's one of the architects of Logitech's AI strategy and a sought-after speaker on topics related to AI and the future of computing. Thanks to mutual friend Scott Wharton for help preparing for this one. And without further ado, Prakash, it's my pleasure to welcome you to AI and the Future of Work. Let's get started by having you share a bit more about that illustrious background and how you got into the space.
A real pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me to this amazing community that you created. So kudos to you for actually curating this. I just say that just a little bit about me as you kind of talk through my background. I started out as an engineer, spent my early days in the Silicon Valley working on enterprise software, building products, startups, the usual stuff, and then went on to do consulting, as you highlighted, really thinking about how to help tech companies make innovation and operational efficiencies come together. How do you make trade-offs on profitability? How do you make trade-offs on innovation? And through that, ended up at Logitech about a decade ago, and it's been a fantastic journey that we've had at Logitech. As you said, we've grown our valuation of the company 5x. We've doubled the company in the time that we've been here, and we've also established ourselves as I'll say, a sustainability leader. And more to come on that e-waste topic that you started the call with earlier. I had lots of thoughts on that. Would be happy to share that. And I'd say through a time in COVID where I realized that a lot of the things that we do in our lives actually have profound impact. And the products that we make at Logitech, us for mice and keyboards. And we've, of course, gone on to make many more things than that: video cameras, gaming devices, etc. But through COVID, it became everything that was a want became a need, and you needed many of the Logitech webcams and mice and keyboards and video cameras to really make your human work and play that you enjoyed before COVID in a normal setting actually happen. And through that journey, I've been really excited to be at this place where we at Logitech call our mission as a company that helps people realize their human potential at work and play. And it's been a real pleasure to be, here at Logitech, where we've had, I'd say, an unusual set of macro trends that have actually coalesced around what we are doing here. Hybrid work or flexible work was a thing before COVID, but it's just been on fire after COVID. It's been accelerating. The topic of AI, which is today's podcast, is definitely one of the big things that's happening to us in tech, and it's impacting how you work and play. And I'm certainly going to talk about how it impacts us in work. And then if you think about the big thing that's also happening to us is sustainability. And you talked about it at the beginning of this podcast. E-waste is a topic, and emissions is a real thing, and it causes a lot of side effects for companies that are thinking about devices in their offices, devices at their homes. How should they behave? How do you make it energy efficient? And then the topic of trust. People think of trust, especially in this era of cybersecurity, and the need for people to realize that companies are actually also custodians of trust, and being able to provide that kind of trust in our products has been a great place where Logitech has put a lot of pride. As a 40 plus year old company, we take a lot of pride in being sort of the neutral tech player that operates across all the ecosystem players, but really brings to our consumers and users the element of trust that you can actually build into our product. So super excited to be here, and thank you for this opportunity, and really look forward to talking to you.
Pleasure to have you here. So, as consumers, of course, we're all familiar with Logitech. It's a household name. I mentioned you and I share a common friend in Scott Wharton. I've had the pleasure of getting to know Logitech, the company, a bit. Could you share with our listeners a little bit more about the culture at Logitech, and maybe also your leadership style, because you're a big part of that culture?
Yeah, indeed. As you said, we are about 7,000 people in about 30 countries. I often describe Logitech as a small, big company in the sense that we are very global for the size of the company we are. We are shipped them to about 80 countries in the world. We have operations in all kinds of places. But if I look at my own team, it is truly global across 3 continents, 3 time zones. And that's a big part of the diversity that Logitech has from a cultural value perspective. And that has put into place our DNA of innovation. If you think about what we've been able to do, we've made, I'd say, a product a week. If you look at the number of new products we make every year, and we've gone well beyond mice and keyboards that we used to be traditionally known for. Everything from there to an AI-powered multi-camera solution for your conference room. So it's really been that diversity in the culture of actually being able to look at multiple points of input, be it from Asia, be it from Europe, be it from right here in Silicon Valley. Being able to bring that together has been a big part of the culture at Logitech. We also think of the culture at Logitech in terms of inclusion, not just within our employees, but with our suppliers, with the way we think about our customers using our products. We really believe that we are at our best when we make our user experiences so rich that you don't realize that they exist, and the tech actually disappears, and you really are in the flow at the moment, and that's a big part of the culture at Logitech. And maybe it's a little bit of that underdog mentality, if you will, of a smaller tech company in, I'll say, in the valley, but a really old tech company that's been innovating quite a bit. My own leadership style, that's one of the reasons I came to work here, was really based on this, is the fact that we like to influence and empower. And I really think that is a big part of my own style of how I operate. And there is a word that some folks have described, and which I really take to heart and aspire to be, which is a pragmatic strategist. You can have your strategy head on the clouds, but you have to have your feet firmly on the ground, know the data that drives your business, make sure you empathize with people at the same time, and make sure that those results actually are people first and numbers second. So that's really been a key part of my own style. As a data guy, I'd say that is the third thing, which is being specific and data driven on things that come to me. And this has really been a pleasure to be at Logitech for this many years.
I watched this great interview that you did with Gary Kay at Infocom, and you were talking about kind of the Logitech vision and how that is kind of operationalized in the form of some of the newer products. And it got me thinking about the role of AI as it increasingly becomes just a part of every consumer product, a part of every technology experience. Talk to us from the perspective of Prakash, but also Logitech. How's that relationship changing between consumer and how they interact with their technology?
I'd say, I'll start with like just with Prakash first, if you like. Let's see, I confess on your show that I watch Netflix quite often. And, you've been seeing this well before generative AI was a thing, recommendations that were coming to you. They were driven by algorithms. So we've already seen the intersection between consumers and technology very early on. And I'd say the same for our products. If you think about noise canceling headsets, a lot of people use them. We have one of our top of the line headsets called Zone 2 wireless headset, which actually uses a small model that actually runs a 20,000 voice sample of data and actually tunes it so that you can actually cancel out noise. Now, when you wear a headset, you're not thinking much about all of those things that's happening on the AI side. You're just thinking about, wait, I'm just wearing a noise canceling headset. It's canceling out noise. And it's become, I think, the way consumers interact with technology has become almost that matter of fact, matter of common sense. And we have similar things that we've done with our keyboards. You could press a button, launch your favorite language model, Copilot, OpenAI, name it. And with the click of a button, it's just part of your workflow. It's something that you think of as doing daily. You don't quite think of it as interacting with AI in a very complex sense, but it is so at reach that it just becomes easier and easier for consumers to really interact. And this is why we are so passionate about how do you extend human potential for people at work. Most people spend most of their time in their lives working. That's normally what most people do. And at that time, how do you make sure you can actually perform at the best, create the best you can, deliver the best kind of performance that you want, not just from a value perspective, but for your own workflow? How do you make sure that you can be in the flow and remove the hassles and frustrations that you might have with many different workflows? One fun fact I'll share is that we did a survey recently, and we found 40% of people waste anywhere between 15 to 30 minutes a day trying to find a meeting room. And anyone who's been in an office, especially as you think about different types of work, you're trying to wonder, how do you do this? And we came up with a few things where You can now automatically book the room. If someone doesn't come in, it automatically releases. You can find where the room is on a map, things of that sort that actually help you navigate with technology, with some of the AI capabilities that exist. So you're not doing a scavenger hunt to go and find a conference room. You're not thinking overly about your noise canceling headset. It just cancels noise. And you continue to, I think, chip away at, I'll say, maybe the dread that is associated with working and make it a little bit more fun, right? Like that is, I think, how I see technology improving consumers' lives.
I love that example of reducing the friction or that's an unbelievable statistic, 15 to 30 minutes. Although sometimes I feel like it's an underestimate, finding conference rooms. So let's take that example. Increasingly, Logitech peripherals are going to be beaconing off the information that's being fed to these AI models, LLMs and otherwise, which I would imagine that from the perspective of product designers, software engineers, there's a whole lot of additional thinking about the design, the responsible use and sharing of the data, the capturing of the data. How has that changed the product development process at Logitech?
First of all, I'll say, just to maybe zoom out for some of your listeners, like who are wondering, where is Logitech and AI intersect? We're not making large language models, so what is the intersect? And the best way to maybe start there first is to say, if you think about the world of agents, and I'll just take OpenAI agents in your daily lives, you need input for these agents to actually produce outputs that humans can utilize. We are that input layer. We're the layer, Logitech is the layer that generates audio, video, and input content. And we are at that intersection between what we think of as people and the digital world, right? You're at that last millimeter between whatever you're doing with your mice and keyboards, your headsets making, recordings with your microphones, or the camera is actually recording. You're at that last millimeter. So for us, you touched on two things there. One was actually being able to serve that data to an AI model in a sense in which it can be utilized nicely. And the second thing is actually being able to do it responsibly. We're actually quite a big believer in, there are at the top of this podcast, you talked about cloud utilizing a lot of horsepower and energy to do things. And we think, we could do a lot of things at the edge. And we've been doing that with small models, which allow you to actually manipulate everything from one of our latest products where we've actually brought to bear this idea of hybrid meetings not being ideal. So if you think about hybrid meetings, especially through COVID, everybody realized that there are, these large things that you see on your screen, people at different ends with webcams. But then when you went into a large room, suddenly the room became, in perspective of the remote worker, really not that useful. Everybody started appearing like tiny ants. You had to squint to see who's in the room. And that inequity or lack of equity was a problem that our customers felt, our users felt. And we just thought about that and said, look, we can actually solve this. And this is where we started working on intelligent framing within our multiple cameras and actually brought to bear things like Logitech Sight, that what it basically does is actually gives you a view of who's in the conference room using multiple cameras to use, I'll say, a little bit of Hollywood and a little bit of AI to bring the right focus and angle of view of each person so that when you're sitting on the remote end, you see who you are. And those are examples of Edge AI collaborating with the cloud-based AI tool, be it Zoom, Team, Google Meet, or others, really bringing to bear this idea of what happens to you as an end user actually receiving this information. And I'll tell you just an example. The first time our CEO actually used one of these devices in all hands meetings across 30 offices. We typically have about 2,000 people dialing in. And for the first time, we got dozens of comments that said, I can actually see clearly who's sitting in the CEO's table, who are the leadership members, what are they actually feeling, and you could almost feel like you're at the table. And this is the potential that I see of us actually being able to bring these inputs along with these large models and cloud-based models together to be able to actually solve real customer pain points and experiences. So that is really how I think about our role in the AI universe, and where it intersects perhaps with user experiences and employee experiences that you may have in your offices.
I mentioned that in addition to your role as COO, you also head up the business unit that sells Logitech components to businesses.
Yeah.
And related to that comment you just made, I would think there's also an opportunity to use AI to ease the burden of IT that's owning the networking and the configuration of Logitech equipment. Maybe talk about that perspective on AI and Logitech.
Yeah, companies are seeing a lot of success deploying AI at the desk, in a conference room, and everything in between, right? I'll say tens of thousands of companies are using this idea of what we call Logitech Sync, which is in our enterprise software to remotely manage spaces and devices of their global workforce. So if you're a company and you have mostly offices and remote workers in all kinds of places all over the world, IT team members are often tasked to figure out how to manage that setup. How do you manage now remote employees and global offices that exist across the world? How do you manage that? And so we really took that problem to heart to be able to actually allow IT managers to be able to manage their setup. And we have things like remote access. So imagine, you used to have this idea of the desktop client that somebody could virtually log into your desktop to be able to troubleshoot. We brought the same kind of thing to conference rooms where you can, through remote UI access, actually control conference room. And we're doing this obviously within the guardrails of only certain people being able to access that information at certain times. So we can track patterns of usage, like how often is a room used? How many people are in a room at a given time? So you can take out the guesswork on how do you set up various spaces? How do you set up your desks? How do you set up the right kind of usage and occupancy in an office and make real precise decisions? And most IT managers are always challenged on how to make things cost effective. What is the total cost of ownership for some of these? And we really brought some of the AI tools that I just talked about to bear for the customers, IT admins, to make these real precise decisions. And this has been one of the big things that I think we've received some really positive feedback from many IT players on. And along with that, the idea of actually managing this idea of e-waste that you just talked about. And I'll go back to that, and just kind of give you some numbers, right? If you think about the IT industry at large, it's about 4% of of carbon footprint of the world. So about 4% of the carbon footprint of the world is from IT-led devices and IT industry as a whole. 4% may not seem like a lot, but it is thousands and thousands of tons, and it's growing faster, not counting e-waste, which you referenced earlier, which is the fastest growing waste category. And within that, if you click into that and say, if you are an IT manager out there who's really thinking about this problem, what is the biggest sources of carbon footprint within your firewall, within your IT scope and domain? And you usually first think of data centers, second, think of enterprise applications and things of that sort. Turns out devices in companies are about 31% of their entire carbon footprint. So this is another thing that we've been really passionate about, driving changes to how we design our products, how we make them more sustainable, how do we make sure that they're more energy efficient, how do we actually make sure that if you're an IT manager out there, you're responsibly deploying AI by actually also reducing the energy load on some of the products and devices that you buy. And that is one of the other reasons we are super passionate about the edge-based AI tools, because they generally require less energy. You can do a lot more smart things, and you reduce the burden on the cloud providers to actually do a lot more compute. And this is a huge opportunity unlock for us and for the industry at large.
Feels like so many manufacturers of consumer electronics are fighting regulation and wanting to distance themselves from what we all know based on this stats that you cited, what I shared earlier. is the environmental footprint of these devices. Why is the philosophy at Logitech so different?
We're of the firm belief that I think you can actually design for sustainability, and you could do this in a way in which you can deliver customers, like I said, an amazing experience at nearly the same cost, but with far less carbon. I mean, and these are not trade-offs that you need to be making. And so it comes from that place of the belief that if you can design smart, you can design for progress. And that's probably fundamentally rooted in how we've been thinking about this. So we've taken everything from the smallest of things that you can imagine, a mice that we make, and a mice is probably the least carbon footprint thing that you could probably imagine at your desk. But we've really taken that problem to solve that problem because we wanted to see if we can actually change the footprint of a mice. We should be able to change a lot of other things. And we've made some really good progress on this front. And I think, I do think this idea of regulations driving this is probably maybe not the right way to look at this. I think the right way to look at it is, can you get there in a place where materials are going to run out? You're going to have energy challenges. And just purely from a pure practical perspective, can you actually make something, design something to be better, and at the same time deliver the same experience? So Dan, it's really come from that place, and that's really what we've been focused on. And I think it's one of the things that we are extremely proud of being not named as one of the leaders. And I'll say we've carbon labeled many of our products. And if you think about carbon labeling, the idea of carbon labeling is again related back to some of the core principles on being transparent with our consumers, be it on AI, being responsible, which you talked about earlier, or being transparent on our footprint. And this is one of the things that we see.
So usually the corollary to a statement like that is that you pass along the increased cost of building sustainability into your supply chains to the consumer.
Yeah.
How do you respond to that? Or presumably, I mean, you obviously have a profit motive, and you're looking at margins, and you have competitors that are maybe producing similar devices, not of the same quality, and certainly not with the same sustainability standards. But how do you defend that philosophy versus the need to improve margins?
Yeah, I think at the top of the podcast here, I just called out some of our great numbers. And we've been doing this, I think, without impacting the numbers and delivering consumer experiences. So, evidence one. Evidence two, I'll say, is the simplest way to think about these trade offs is I'll take an example that everybody can associate with packaging, right? So, if most things have packaging, how do you reduce carbon footprint on packaging? You make it smaller, you make it lighter, make it with less materials that you're not going to use that often, brown boxed, etc. This is exactly what we do for Logitech for Business, the business unit I run. And it's not impacting consumer experiences. It's actually making it better. So that's another example. I'll say that's evidence too. So I do think it's possible. And I'll harken back to something you talked about earlier in the podcast, which is around responsibly exercising your right in the topic of AI, but equally on the topic of sustainability. And they come from the same place, which is having transparency, having fairness, having accountability for what you do as an organization. So I don't quite see these as trade-offs on money. If you're going to be a responsible AI company, you're also a responsible, sustainable company. I mean, they're kind of similar things, and there are some similarities here.
So we talk a lot on this show about the impact of AI on jobs, and specifically IT jobs. And as we talked about some of the ways that more Logitech gear is kind of infiltrating all facets of an enterprise environment, one line of thinking is that's going to lead to more people needed to manage these more complex interconnected network systems. But I know from this conversation and from when I've heard you talk previously, that there's also a mid or long-term vision to have the devices be smart enough to self-heal. How do you think about kind of the impact on the need for teams to manage Logitech gear when we're trying to do both things at once, avoid elimination of jobs, but also make it easier for these devices to self-heal?
Yeah, technology is at its best when it kind of becomes invisible, right? I think And self-healing, self-diagnosis, self-configuration, these ideas kind of fit into this idea that technology should enable what the users want without much friction. And we have a lot of redundancies built into many different layers of our devices and equally on our software stack. So we have something called CollabOS, which is our operating system for our video conferencing devices. They have plenty of redundancies in place. When you're on a video call, it self heals, sort of. It recovers without anyone knowing that something went wrong. And often, when some packets are dropped or bandwidth is limited, it automatically corrects. Those are examples of good self healing, self configuration, self diagnosis things that don't quite replace a job necessarily, right? They are things that make your experience better. Equally, I mean, there are self-configuration devices that allow you to actually make sure that like IT administrators don't have to go to different places. And I gave an example of the remote UI access, which allows you to not have to get up and like go to different places. In some ways, it's actually more sustainable also for IT teams. So I think those are good examples. And if we actually make sure that we focus on technology actually helping us remove friction, it'll be a really good thing for the world. And this is why I talk about extending human potential at work and play as our mission and core value. And different organizations, I think I'll say, also have this. Most organizations, I would say, have this this thesis that is true, which is that they have more ideas than they have resources. So training your people to be able to use AI, to be able to do things that are automated, repetitive tasks that free up resources, should help you focus on those rewarding parts, like take the dread out of work, so to speak, and help you really become productive, more collaborative, and to make sure that there is better output from it. So I don't quite see this as a either or. It can be an and there are a lot of things that will require humans, things that require intuition. I'll say a large part of my job is consuming data, but equally a large part of my job is actually intuition, knowing what pieces of data to trust, whose information is probably more accurate than others. That ability to use your intuition is going to be uniquely human. I said it, I think you said in the top of this call, human if brain is more efficient than any electronic device. And that is so true, especially when it comes to creative thinking, especially when it comes to understanding nuanced behaviors. And so there will be a role for, I think, this idea of a human driving some of these AI-led innovations. So that's kind of how I see this.
I love that answer. It's more nuanced than, like you said, either or. It's and. I believe that the enterprise of the future will not be constrained by the limitations of today's technology. And so as fast as we can innovate, we can build new capabilities into the technology. We're really good as a species at innovating and dreaming up new uses of them. So I believe, whether it's wearables or AR, VR, immersive experiences, how we interact with technology is going to get changed, and that requires more people to innovate and train and coach and help us make good use of them. But to me, it's very one dimensional to think about AI in terms of job loss. It's more important to think about maximizing human potential, like you've been saying, and that's the unlock. We don't even know how big to dream in terms of the kinds of roles that we're going to need to fill as these emerging capabilities become mainstream in the workplace. It sounds consistent with the way you and Logitech think as well.
And I think this is why I'm super excited about it. And I think you touched on something earlier as well, like the idea of some of these technologies. If you go back 10 years, go back 20 years, and you look at what we've been able to enable, they're purely magic. If you think about it from that context, and sometimes magic can be scary when it actually is being created. And that's where we are in this journey of AI. I do think it's got massive potential, and we have to be responsible about how we treat it, and to make sure that we are using fairness and other things that are very, very important. But it also allows you to imagine new possibilities that didn't exist before. I completely agree. I think with your view here as well.
So you've been at the company, like you said, about a decade, and it's changed a lot over that period of time. Talk us through two things. One, how you've seen Logitech change, and maybe equally important, how has Logitech changed you in that decade?
Yeah. Um, I think we were. I'd say we wanted to hold on to a few things that are. I'd say first, the things that have not changed is probably worth talking about first. So we were a small, big company. It's kind of always been the ethos of Logitech, which is how do you make sure you have small teams, you can go fast, you can have that startup underdog mentality, you can empower people, you can make sure that you can influence. Those things haven't changed. I think that they still remain the same. We're still the same global company, but we've gotten much, much bigger, right? And I think with size, with scale, comes, I'll say, some focus and responsibility as a larger company. So we've done things like think about our role in the company and our role in the ecosystem. We are one of the, I'll say, the first few signatories of the European Union Commission on the Responsible AI Pact that passed a few weeks ago. So we've done things like that, promoted AI literacy in our workforce, put in place governance measures. So I'd say Logitech from a decade ago to now has become more responsible about our role and our impact. And this is also another reason, Dan, you've heard me talk about sustainability today, heard me talk about trust. And these things actually have changed for us. And I think we now are a much bigger company. I dare say we have touched hundreds of millions of people's lives in the last 10 years. And with that comes responsibility, and we've really taken that seriously. I think, and for me personally, I would say it's almost the same because I realize every day that I'm making decisions um, 10 years ago that were much smaller in scope. Now, if you make a decision about how a camera behaves in a certain way in a conference room, immediately it impacts a lot of the people who see our software update in the next release. If we think about how our workflows should change for the next generation of mice and keyboards and webcams we're making, it immediately impacts, again, hundreds of millions of people through our software updates that we provide. So that has really changed, in terms of how we think about our responsibility. I'd also say I have more fun than I've ever had in the last 10 years. And I continue to have that fun. So that has not changed a wee bit. And we're at this like massively interesting place where all these like mega trends are intersecting where we are as a company. And it is super exciting to see this actually come to place. I think the fact I would have said 10 years ago, yeah, hybrid work may happen, sustainability may be important, AI might happen at some point. There's always been raised, as well as like there was a view that at some point, 2030, 2040, it might happen, but only a few believers really believed it. We're much closer to all those things than we thought 10 years ago. And so the art of possible has become closer.
Absolutely. Hey, Prakash, it feels like we're just getting started, but I got to get you off the hot seat. But you're not going anywhere without answering one last important question for me. So you're talking to an audience full of gadget nerds, and I got to know from an expert here, what's the one piece of Logitech gear that you use every day that you cannot live without?
I'll give you two. How about that? I use my video camera, which actually is this with Logitech site that I just talked about in every conference room I go to. And at my desk, I have the MX Anywhere mouse that I actually use all the time to create things. These are the two things that I think I can't live without.
Brilliant. That was not a paid ad, by the way. That was just me genuinely being curious about how you use Logitech gear. Uh, well, you really are on the forefront of what we talk about all the time, AI and the future of work, and you're doing such important work. I hope that maybe you'll come back again in the future and give us an update.
Happy to, Dan, and I'm sure next time we talk, we'll have more things to talk about on the cool things we've done with AI and how work has changed for everyone. And I hope to be back here. Thank you for the invite. I really appreciate being included in your amazing community.
Well, great work, and specifically great work to you and the team on your focus on sustainability.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, gosh, that's all the time we have for this week on AI and the future of work. As always, I'm your host, Dan Turchin from PeopleRain. And of course, we're back next week with another fascinating guest.